without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today. Dr. Jean Clinton is a clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences at McMaster University. She's on staff at McMaster Children's Hospital with cross appointments in pediatrics and family medicine. She is also an associate in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Toronto and Sick Children's Hospital. She is a senior scientist at the Infant and Child Health Lab at McMaster University. She's been a consultant to children and youth mental health programs, child welfare, and primary care for almost 30 years. Dr. Clinton was recently appointed as an education advisor to the Premier of Ontario and the Minister of Education. She is renowned locally, provincially, nationally, and internationally as an advocate for children's issues. Her special interest lies in brain development and the crucial role that relationships and connectedness play, which fits in very nicely with our theme today. So we are very excited to hear from her and to learn from her knowledge and passion. It will be instrumental in our learning this morning. So welcome, Dr. Clinton.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start by handing the microphone over to our young fella here, who's going to change the batteries while I call up my slide show, so you guys can talk amongst yourself for a minute. So I'm very thrilled. Our smart young folks at the back are going to be monitoring the sound, but at least we know it's not going to be cutting in and out. So I'm really thrilled to be here. I am, as you heard, an infant, child, and adolescent psychiatrist. And I toss in that I'm an infant psychiatrist because I developed a preschool team for little ones from 3 to 5. And we now know that the world that we live in, strange, and sadly enough, is a world where we are seeing children under 3 also having really significant problems with even depression and anxiety. So as a child psychiatrist, what I've learned is that when we're thinking about well-being and mental illness, we really need to be thinking about the continuum from prenatal all the way on until children reach adulthood, which is about 39 as far as I'm learning. Taking on adult roles is getting later and later, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So your conference theme of building healthy relationships is such an important concept, because I've been in this world of child psychiatry for almost, it'll be 30 years next year. I know I look like I'm still in the bloom of youth and all, but that's my good Scottish heritage, like your director. But you know, I now do a lot of presentations, probably about half of my time across North America, doing presentations, because what I've learned in my 30 years of clinical work is that we need to be thinking not about how can we get more child psychiatrists, but how can we be upstream and preventing some of the mental health challenges that young people experience. How can we be an upstreamist instead of being downstream? I have a very good friend with the government in Manitoba, and he's actually done the calculation. If we were, so 1 in 5 children we know has a diagnosable mental health disorder, and that number is about the same even for children under 6. And if we were to add up all of the mental health specialists, all the psychiatric social workers and nurses and doctors, we will never be able to treat ourselves out of this dilemma. So what it means is all kids are our kids. That we have to be thinking, as your director was saying, that it takes the village, it takes a civic community to raise our children. Nobody can do it alone, and we really need to be having a paradigm shift, as he says, of engagement. And I'm going to be telling you in these next 40 minutes or so that this science of engagement, the importance of relationship and connection, is the solution to so many of the challenges that kids have. As you've heard, I'm one of 4 special advisors to the Premier and Minister of Education around educational issues. So like, oh man, my dad was an educator and he's up there in heaven going, oh, that's my girl. He'll be very, very pleased about that. But you know, one of the reasons I was invited to be one of the 4 is in Ontario, we have a new vision for education called Achieving Excellence. And before, the emphasis has been on what we always know schools should be about, graduation rates and closing the gap between, you know, the kids that we were hearing about and others. But we now have a 4th pillar of education, which is well-being. So Ontario as a province is saying that building healthy relationships is key to student success. But we've also pushed very hard to, well, we haven't had to push very hard, but we've been very emphatic, saying that that also needs to be about the well-being of the staff and of the school. So in Ontario, we will be looking at what are the, you know, how can we make this so? What does a healthy classroom that's mentally healthy and building resilience, what does it look like? So building healthy relationships is all about building healthy connections day to day. In our drip, drip, drip of everyday interaction, that is how we build healthy relationships. I bring my two of my mentors who have gone on before, who have died, for a number of reasons. One is Dan was the guy, Dan Offord at the top there. He talked to thousands of kids over his career, and he realized what you have here in Halton, and that is the postal code that you live in has a bigger influence on your health, on your education, on your whole mentality than anything the healthcare system has to offer. Your health and your postal code go hand in hand. So kids who are living in poverty, who do not have the wonderful opportunity to access what we were hearing about this morning, we know that their brains get built differently. That instead of having a very clear running field that they can really soar, they have got all kinds of pitfalls and holes and big barriers that they have to overcome. Dan dedicated his life to making that playing field more even. And I'm hearing from the work and the philosophy in Halton that there's a dedicated view to do that. So we need to know, how are our children doing? And we know we've got graduation rates, we've got how we do in international student achievement, but more and more the world literature is saying what really counts is children's social and emotional learning and their social and emotional well-being. In fact, there's this big fancy test that everybody gets their knickers in a knot about called PISA. And the director of PISA is saying, you know, maybe we've been measuring the wrong thing with just looking at literacy, numeracy, and some of the science things. Maybe we need to look at relationships. Why? Because there's been some side effects of focusing on literacy and numeracy in countries like Korea, where they've got great, fantastic results on these 15-year-olds in their international tests, but their suicide rate has gone off the roof. People are so concerned about doing well. So we really need to be thinking, I would say, in our work as parents and in our work as involved parents in our children's education, that we need to make sure that a view of the whole child is the view of the education and the educators. So Dan and Clyde, when you were with them, here's a key message. I always felt by them. I felt when I was in their company that I mattered. You know, I may have some stupid question, but I really felt that they were paying attention to me. And so there is a key message for you that will weave in throughout these next few minutes. And that is, how well do your kids feel felt by you. Now, I don't mean your foot up their backside to get them going, right? Like your director's dad had to do many times, I'm sure, for him. As you can tell, we're both Scottish, so we've already started a little bit of that Scottish back and forth. But it is that, think about the interactions that you've had with your children. You might have had some already this morning. If they're teenagers, quite unlikely, because they're asleep for a long time more. But how much time in a week do we spend correcting our kids, redirecting them, and how much time do we spend connecting with them? We are now living in a world where the organizing of our children's lives is what we spend so much time doing. I want to go back a bit. Oh, we're going the wrong way. So, parents and schools are a key partnership. It's our connecting to our children and what you do at home, which is the research evidence that says when you have parents' involvement with their children and the environment at home is one of learning and interest and curiosity, then kids do well. So it is in fact a key partnership, but it's not about drilling and killing. It's not about the agony of going over homework. If, I'll tell you this, and it always gets me in trouble, but I say it anyway. If as Queen, as a child psychiatrist, if as Queen there was one thing that I could ban, you know what it would be? Homework. Well, that took you a long time to figure out. Homework. One, because I tell you guys, the evidence for homework in the elementary years is worse than bad. But for me, homework doesn't work. It doesn't. Engagement and learning, being excited about what your child is learning and talking to them about that and expanding their thinking. Man, oh man, that works. But homework doesn't. So, you know, now do you know what? Some people up front are already texting me. Saying, shut up already. But just because homework doesn't have effectiveness doesn't mean that our involvement in our children's learning at home isn't hugely effective. Why am I so worried about it as a child psychiatrist? Well, because homework leads to arguments. Homework hugely interferes with relationship. And if we could shift homework to learning at home, I'd love it. I'd love it. If we could you see the mindset there? The mindset is homework is about stuffing the duck, right? It's we as adults and teachers have got this great knowledge base and we want to stuff it into the kids. Well, that means that we have a view of children that they're not that bright, that they're not very capable or competent. Whereas if you've got a view of the child as capable, competent, excited about their learning, and that's what we're seeing in our full-day learning program, full-day kindergarten, then you approach learning very differently. So it becomes learning at home rather than homework. Learning at home, how about making that change? How about Halton being the leader and saying, learning at home is a key aspect of the parent engagement and involvement committee. So I have to let you know, if I can let you know, as I move to the next slide, that I am a medical doctor, and so I have to tell you if I've got any big drug company sponsoring me, right? If I've got any conflict of interest. So these are my sponsors, not a drug company. These are my 5 great kids. Same dad as of the coffee that he made me this morning, which was delicious. My husband is a purist. He not only, you know, some people crunch their own beans. He roasts his own beans. So I have this lovely home roasted. Now these are my 5 children. I don't have another couple that aren't so great, just in case you've got a sick sense of humor and think she only shows the good ones. But you know, I show you my guys. So I'm a child psychiatrist, I've got a bunch of degrees, I've done a whole bunch of different things. This is my most important and ongoing job. It's the most important. My mantra is progress, not perfection. So, you know, people think, oh, Jean, you're a child psychiatrist, you never yell at your kids. Are you frickin' crazy? Oh, but relationship. I have to have different kinds of relationship with my children because temperamentally, they're very different. Same genes, same mom and dad, but completely different. My older son on the far right there just got married a week ago today, so we are absolutely thrilled to a French immersion teacher, by the way. Yes. So anyway, but not in your board, not in your board. Oh yes. So Andrew was a very easy baby. We could figure him out. Temperamentally, he would go with the flow. He hardly ever cried. So we thought we were the best, just the best. But then 18 months later, along came my daughter, who is second from the end with straight hair, well, it's straightened hair. And she, oh my Lord, she cried if she wasn't with me. I was training as a psychiatrist. My husband's a doctor. We had never heard about temperament. And so I read all the books that we could get our hands on. One was Your Spirited Child, which was our saving grace. Anybody have a child who is more intense? They feel things bigger. They don't like the feel of Velcro or socks have lines on them. Who frickin' knew that socks had lines? Well, we learned it, but we didn't know. And so one of the books that I read that was really, really good was called Your Difficult Child, or The Difficult Child. So this was a great book. It was written by a pediatrician who had always said when parents had children who were more intense, hard to figure out, cried more negative when new things came into the picture, he said, oh, well, you know what, it's you mums and inexperienced dads. And then didn't the Creator give him one? So once he had a child who was more, he realized, oh my Lord, this is temperament. And I couldn't use his book as much. I didn't like it as well, because one of the things is he called kids like Kathlina mother killers. Because they are so demanding. And you know, I do a whole talk on temperament, and it really is very much worth looking up. If you just Google kids' temperament or temperament, you see that there are traits that kids have. That they're not doing it to drive you crazy, but that they are their inborn ways of interacting with the world. And how to survive and develop healthy relationships needs to be the key focus. And so there's a goodness of fit. My daughter Kathlina, she was very intense. As a teenager, I remember we went on a disastrous boat, you know, one of those houseboat things up in Tamagami. And she sat and cried in the upstairs bunk because she just wanted to be with her friends. You know, here's a lovely family vacation. And mind you, we were stuck in a cove for 2 days with no, with the engine dead. No radio. We had SOS on top. We made SOS sign with our towels on top. It hurt my feelings that she wasn't enjoying the joy of the moment. Anyway, so we really need to be thinking, what is our attitude? What is our attitude towards our children? I will tell you that I can give you science paper after science paper after science paper that says that how we view our children now and in the future is affected by the past, but also relationship, our interaction with our kids, our purpose in interacting with our kids is what makes all the difference in the world. So connection is key. Connection is key. And I was invited to write a paper for the government in a document called Think, Feel, Act that you can Google me or you can go to the government website and you'll see it there. And it talks about why being connected to our children And that means not directing them all the time, but really stopping and asking them, what's important to you? What do you love about school? What do you hate about school? But that you also talk about your day so that they see, well, you know, life can be great. When you ask kids about their parents that they'd like to see differently or they worry, what our kids are saying is that they're worried sick about us because we're so stressed. They are seeing our stress. Now, does that mean that we have to hide our stress? Well, I say yes. And some, for little kids, we absolutely do. And you know, the other thing that kids say is that adults hate their work. Wow. Well, why is that? Because we come home from work and we biatch about it, right? So all they hear is the negative of the work that we do. So here's a call to action, people of Halton. And that is, we have young people who are experiencing anxiety, reporting anxiety at a rate that has never been measured before. Between 2008 and now, the number of visits to the emergency room with cutting, suicidal thinking has gone sky high in the past number of years. And we really have to be saying, wow, if it takes the village to raise the child, what is the water like that our kids are swimming in? And are we inadvertently contributing to that? So what does it mean? To me, it means that we need to spend more time connecting with our kids, not putting them in the car and driving them to this, that, and the other thing so they don't fall behind, but actually having conversation. Talk about what you love about your work. Have the conversation that you have great things at work, but model that you have control of many aspects of your life. Why do I say this? Because our young people are reporting that they feel anxious because they feel they are not going to be able to change any of the factors that are making them so anxious. So it's a real problem. When we do surveys, and there's a survey called Tell Them From Me that some boards do, and kids are identifying that they have very few connections to significant adults in their life. Less than 40% in some of the surveys. Less than 40% in some of the surveys say that they have a significant adult that they can turn to. Kids in the asset building framework, when they're interviewed and they fill out a questionnaire, they say that they know their parents love them, but they don't turn to them for help. What's that about? What's that about? So we know our kids are really important and we know they need us, but what emphasis do we have? Do we have an emphasis on what they are going to do? Or do we have an emphasis on who they are and who they're going to be, but who they are just now? Do you know what I mean? We so often have a focus on the future and not nearly enough of a focus on here and now, today. So the next slide, okay, we'll do this one, is that parents, the evidence shows, contrary to popular belief, that you make a difference, even in the teenage and adolescent years. Parent connectedness is the single healthiest force in the lives of, this is US teenagers. Parent connectedness is the single healthiest force in the lives of US teenagers. That's from one of the top leading, top journals, the Journal of the American Medical Association. Teens navigate the chaos of the teen years better when they've got adults in their life. So parents matter hugely. We have this mythology out there that says once kids gets into their tweens, and that's starting at 9 or 10, parents don't count that much. I want every time you hear that, if you are prone to having a Scottish curse, say that is full of shite. It's not swearing because it's Scottish. It's not swearing. But parents have a massive influence. There was a book that was written by a smart woman but came to a stupid conclusion. And that was that once kids become teenagers, because of their attachment to their peer group, which is hugely important, we wouldn't be here as a species if they hadn't attached to their peer group, reproduced and created the rest of Homo sapiens. But it doesn't mean that they love us less. Our attachment pathways in our brain are huge, and they can connect. They can connect and multiply. So loving your kids through these adolescent years, rather than thinking, oh my God, we'll just have to get through this. Connecting with your kids about how confusing a time it is so important. So, parents absolutely matter. We need to be thinking, and this one says, the everyday secret to better communication with your child. Listen, listen, listen. One of my colleagues, a First Nations woman from Walpole Island, Elaine, said, you know, my grandmother said we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should be listening twice as much as we talk. But how many of us want to be correcting them, want to be telling them what they should be doing? They come home from work and they come home from school and they said, you know, my teacher doesn't like me. And what's the first thing that we say out of our mouth? Of course they do. Of course they do. Instead, if we're interested in connecting and relating, then we say, wow, tell me. It's a magical phrase, guys. Wow, tell me. We want them to be happy, so we think we want to give them the solution. But the only way they're going to be happy is if they're able to create their own solution. And you do that through relationship and connection. So, my teacher doesn't like me. Wow, tell me. That must feel yucky if you think your teacher doesn't like you. What makes you think that? Do you see how you open the door to that? And that's not me being a shrink. That's me trying to be the kind of mum that I always wanted to be, but didn't get to be. Recently, I had this big blow up with my son Jojo, who I'll talk about in a few minutes, in the teen brain. So we're having this big it was about money or his degree, I have no idea. So he's 22, and I've learned more about the frickin' teenage brain with my Jojo than I ever wanted to know. Anyway, we're yelling at each other, and he's really angry, and I'm really angry. And he says, Mum, you're a child psychiatrist. You know this is the wrong way to do things. Yep, you got it, Jojo. I absolutely do, but sometimes, you know. All right. So connection more than correction. You're getting that concept. So the next slide is really for us a challenge for us to think about what is our view, what's important to us in our relationship with our kids. You know, I remember people talking about driving down to Florida for a family together time. And then asking them, oh yeah, how are you getting there? Or how are you preparing? And what they were doing was making sure, back in the day, that they had the Game Boys, enough batteries for the Game Boys, that they had the DVDs going, that they had all of the electronics, to God forbid there should be any interaction with the kids going down. Rather than thinking about that family vacation, really, truly thinking about that family vacation as a time to learn about how people get on. We have, in many ways, taken play away from children. Why? I was asked, I was just in Newfoundland and Labrador in St. John's, and one guy, you know, we talk about this all the time. One guy said, you know, when I was a kid, we used to go out for the whole day, and my friend Christine said, yeah, well, you know what, my mum would lock the door so we couldn't get back in. Off we went, and I said, well, Christine, that explains an awful lot. Yeah, exactly. But you know, people would go out. Now, if you plot the number of child abductions from a couple of generations ago to the amount of area that kids are able to play in, you see that huge area of play, huge area of play and walking, with tons of child abductions. The smaller, as we've gotten smaller in terms of what our kids can play, you've seen also the number of child abductions going down. And it's the media that makes us really afraid. This is a safer time in society than it's ever been. And yet people, parents, you, have the perception that it's scary. Well, if we are giving our kids the message that the world is a scary place, then they're not out there playing. Play is how children learn. Play is how children learn. And we're seeing amazing things in high-quality childcare and high-quality parent-child programs where kids are coming in and asking, where does the rain come from? Where does the rain come from? And then a whole exploration of that, from going outside, watching the rain go down the gutters as the sun comes up, watching it go up and evaporate. And when I was in Italy, I saw 4-year-olds who had created the entire water cycle through their play and through their inquiry. In Ontario, more schools are starting to think about how can we have kids more engaged in learning by setting the stage for their curiosity to be nurtured, for their inquiry, what they're interested in, to be explored. What's the role of the teacher there? Not the sage on the stage, but the person who's beside them, learning along with them. This is a vision for education in Ontario, but it's based on a view of children as capable and as competent. Now, where does all of this brouhaha come from? Well, let me tell you, I love what we have learned about the brain in the past number of decades, the past 10, 15 years. We know more about the brain than we ever knew before. So why do we say that having enriched environments for little children, having the opportunity for kids who don't have as much money to engage fully in community life, why is that so important? Well, because we now know that the environment changes the brain. We used to think that who we were was determined by our genes. We now know that our genes get activated or silenced by the environment. So you're not as smart as your parents were. What your parents give you in terms of IQ, in terms of the intelligence genes, is never going to be as fully realized if you're in an environment where nobody talks to you when you're a little kid, where you don't get to play and explore, where you don't have loving, nurturing relationships. We have seen kids who have been raised in isolation, who had normal IQ parents, who are mentally retarded because of the deficit of interaction. But we've also seen kids whose parents have IQs of 45. And those kids have IQs of 100. In fact, I know a young woman, both of her parents were involved with Association for Community Living, and she's doing a master's. She'll be completing it in May of this year out at the University of Victoria. Before, we would have said, are you crazy? That's not how it works. That's not how it works. Your genes determine who you are. But that's not the case. So not only that, it means that we have to think, now this is a bit of the time when guilt may come into the room. So there's tons and tons of change that happens in the early years. Babies' brains, when they first come out, are only about a third of the size that they're going to be by the time they're 3. And what all of the brain cells called neurons are there and in place, but what builds it, what turns those neurons on is the experience of being picked up, of being sung to, of being soothed, of being read to. Reading to and with a child is one of the most powerful interventions that we can have to counteract the impact of poverty. Why? Because when you're reading with a baby, when you're reading with a child, when you're doing it in an interactive way, not what word is that, what word is that, what word is that, but oh wow, look, there's a fire engine. Uncle Tommy, he's a fireman. So is that what he goes to work in? Wow, that is so cool. So you link the book to life. You link the beginning, the middle, and the end sequence. You've got the little ones sitting beside you, so they're smelling you. They have the feel of you. Reading is one of the most important things that we can do. But the brain is sculpted by this lifetime of experience. So it may start prenatally, and we know that now. There's a huge burst, so that baby in the first year is living. When the baby comes out, people are thinking, scientists are thinking, that they are born 9 months prematurely. Wow, that there's so much change that we should be thinking about the first year of life as an external womb. Not that you're not talking to the baby and building those brain cells, because the brain cells that get turned on, they're the ones that wire up. The ones that get repeated over and over and over again get wired up. So brain cells at one end, they've got dendrites like finger branches, so the senses are taking everything in. It turns on signal and neurons and proteins in the middle, and then sends a big long signal down. So babies and children who hear millions of words in their first 3 years arrive at full day of kindergarten with lots of words to say. There's a big study that saw that there was a 30 million word gap between poor kids and well-to-do kids. 30 million word gap in the number of words that they had heard. So that means that a little kid coming from Halton in an area of poverty, they are arriving at full day learning with only 300 or 400 words. They may not have the concept of on or under. When they're told to go to the cloakroom and take off your coat, they don't know what take off means. That's compared to the kid with 1,200 words. The kid with 1,200 words, if somebody knocks over their Duplo, they say, I don't like that. That hurts my feelings. The little guy with 300 words, when somebody knocks over his work, what does he do? Whack, chuck you, farty, you know? So it starts very early. It's why the early years are so very, very important. But it doesn't stop there. How does the brain get built? Not by fancy flashcards. Please do not give your children an iPad before they are 2 years of age. They should have 0 screen time before 2, according to the American Pediatric Society. Why? Because what builds the brain is not being bombarded with sound, but it is child-directed speech. It is the back and forth. The child serve and return with caring adults in their life. But so it's sculpted by a lifetime of experience. So that means there's another great period of opportunity when kids become teenagers, adolescents. Oh my Lord. So adolescence, huge changes happen in the brain. Huge changes happen in the brain. In fact, the brain, we used to think that in adolescence, all the changes that happened then were due to what? Hormones, that's right. We now know that those neurons that I told you about, so they get joined up in the early years, and what doesn't get used gets sculpted away, and then along comes adolescence, and it is a major time for sculpting, for rewiring, under construction. Everybody say the adolescent brain is under construction. They are not mini adults. They are not adults in waiting. Their brains are going through massive changes. Now here's the challenge. Sorry, I can't make the slides work, but I think you'll, let's see if I can get to it. No, I won't bother about it. So, what is different in the teenage brain is that there Emotional part of the brain, the I want it now, it's so exciting, I think this will be fun. That part of the brain is developing ahead of the last part of the brain up here, which is stop, plan, think about it. That's the last area to develop. It's the last area to develop. So the emotional brain, the thrill-seeking brain is developing ahead of the stop, plan, think about it brain. So what does that mean for us as parents? It means that we need to give them the skills of bringing in the stop, plan, and think about it brain. They also, their brain is developing and figuring out the pathways for recognizing faces. Adolescents, on average, now adolescence goes on until 25, 26 years of age, under construction, these changes, later in males, sometimes a whole lot later in some males, none to be mentioned. But facial recognition, how many, the recognition of emotion, how many of you have had kids who say, you're always yelling, and you want to say, oh, you think that was yelling? So they're reading more emotion. Why? Because biologically it's essential that they learn and read the group. They have a super drive to be with their peers. Why? Biological necessity that our species continues. And it's our young who are doing the no, they're not right now. But that drive is huge. That drive for thrill-seeking and sensation-seeking is the drive that sent those young men out hunting in the rain so that they could find out where the best game was. The adults said, oh honey, it's too cold out there. Come back into the cave. But the adolescents said, no, let's do the thrill. So in fact, we are here as a species thanks to our teenage children. Doesn't that just make your frickin' day? But keep it in mind. Keep it in mind. They need more of our time, not less of our time. There's a Cree story that I learned about when I was out west. And the Cree believe, one, that our children are our sacred ones. They are the heart of the nation. It's a sacred responsibility of the community to raise our children. When children have special rights, they have been given to us by the Creator for a very good reason for us to learn. But they also believe that the elders have much to teach. And in this, when I heard this story, it really resonated with me. And it was the Cree elder is talking to the kids. Connection is key. He's talking to the kids and he says, you know, life is really, really hard. Being an adolescent is really confusing. Are you going to be smart or not smart? Are you going to go with that crowd that you know gets in trouble, or you're not going to? It's confusing. And this goes on throughout life. It's like we've got two wolves in our brain. One is evil and nasty and angry and greedy, and one is kind and nurturing and generous. And one of the little ones up front says, Grandfather, tell me, these fighting wolves, which one wins? And he says, it depends which one you feed the most. In my brief time here with you this morning, I hope I've given you enough stuff to chew on to know that connection and relationships are what we need to be feeding and receiving back from our children, with our children, that our power of one, even if we've screwed up earlier, our power of one to repair is massive. The power of connection, the power of you is massive. But imagine, Halton, if we were to bring all of our powers of one together, what a difference we could make for every single child. So I wish you very well. I thank you for your attention. You've been amazing. And I wish you well with the rest of your conference. Good luck. Enjoy it.